Well, good morning. We'll try to get through this as humbly as possible. We're going to talk about your first Java program, which was what? Hello World. Talk about comments, how to comment things, what a class name, source code, file name is. This should have been before the Hello Java program, right? Main method heading, what braces are, the print line, the complementation and execution, program templates, identifiers, variables, what an assignment statement is, what an initialization statement is. We're going to talk a little bit about numeric data types, integer and long. These are non-decimal pointed. Float and double, those are decimal pointed. Pretty simple, right? Consonants, arithmetic operators, expression, evaluation, increment, decrement, compound assignments, what a char is, escape sequences, some strings, what equals, ignore case, length, and character at. You're going to all need this on your first one. How to input a scanner class. Well, y'all wrote this one, right? You wrote your hello Java, you gave your name. This program prints a hello message, right? Y'all remember this? You're going to be using this throughout your entire class here. Public class hello. We're going to do void main string args. This statement right here you're going to want to know. You're also going to want to know system out print line. So what are we doing here? We're identifying this as class hello. Well, hello matched up, right? That's what it is. At the end of your closing, you can say end main, end class, so you can kind of see where things go. Does that make sense? All right. To include comments, you use the slash and the asterisk to start it, and then you close it out with an asterisk and then slash. Anything in between those is what we call a block comment. Okay. Now, if you're using a single line comment, it's just backslash, or slash, slash for one line. Anything on the next line will be executed. Does that make sense? Commented text is ignored all the time by the compiler. It's just like, oh, I don't need this. The style requirements. The prologue of every program. You need to have the number of lines, the file name, the programmer's name, a blank line, program description, lines of the stars, and then a blank line. That's that header information I gave you. This is Java style or Java coding convention right here. Everyone with me? All Java programs must be enclosed in as a class. The class name shall match the Java file name. All right?
Well, this one it would be public class and then last name, first name, 3.
That's last name, first name, chapter 3. And then, so your class would be last name, first name, chapter 3.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Proper style will dictate that the class name start with an uppercase first letter. Why? It is case sensitive. Java is case sensitive, so the file name should also start with an uppercase first letter. Well, all case sensitive really means is it does distinguish between an upper and a lower. So if you want to have an uppercase X and a lowercase x, they're two different things. It's nice when you want to reuse the same variable, right? But you better identify it very well because you don't want someone to scream. So we talk about this. Always use public class to print your class name. So public class hello. Once you're inside the class, you're going to create a main method, which will be public static void main strings args. And I'm not going to get into how you can manipulate this class. It would be your advanced Java class that you would do with. When a program starts, the computer will look for that main method to function inside that class. And in order for it to know what's inside a main, you have to enclose it inside of braces. So you open up class and close class with braces, and then the main's inside of that, and inside of the main, you're going to have an open and close braces. Pretty simple. Now, let's talk about the system out print line. What does it mean? Well, it's telling the system to output a line or a character, which is print or print line, inside whatever is inside this function. Print line's a function, and it's going to print anything inside those quotes. So in this case, hello, comma, world, exclamation point. Why do you have to put the semicolon at the end of that sentence?
It's the break statement. It tells it when to stop reading for that specific line.
Close enough. It just tells you that that's the end of it. Now here's something interesting. What's the significance of line and print line? Didn't we just cover that? Now you're catching on? Hint, hint, hint. To create a Java program that can be run on a computer, Java has to compile it. What we do, or when we're saying compile it, we're taking the source code and making it into bytecode or machine code. Okay? That machine code then takes that bytecode and puts it down to binary so the machine can read it. Make sense? An identifier. All it is the technical term for the programming language. A class, hello. A method, main. A variable, height. Okay? You're identifying an object to instantiate it, or to give it a meaning. Does that make sense? Are you all with me? Half of you are asleep. Identifier naming rules. Okay? It needs to consist of entirely letters, or mostly all letters, digits, dollar signs, and or an underscore character. Why only dollar signs and an underscore character? Why not an exclamation point?
Exclamation point is not.
Exclamation point is not. It's a reserved character. So what I tell you is, from my standpoint, only use the underscore, because it's really the only one that would not be reserved. Because if I'm using a Java program to import into an Oracle database, Oracle has the dollar sign is reserved. So what would happen?
You know, it looked like a dollar value.
It wouldn't look like a dollar value. It would change the variable. You'd have a lot of type mismatches. So, but your computer or your every variable cannot start with a digit. It has to start with a letter, upper or lower. So, it's best just to use upper and lower characters. Do camel case. Y'all have heard of that? You know what camel case is? It means upper and lower characters. So lower case is a little lower, so you do it like this and get humps. That's why they call it camelback. Okay, identifier naming conventions. Just because they're broken doesn't necessarily mean the program won't compile, but it may not run. Okay. Use letters and digits. Don't use these as a to name things. All letters must be lowercase except for the first letter and the second, third words. If you're running multiple words together, the start of the next word you want to make it uppercase so it's easier to identify. All right. Now you can start by like student record if you want to, but as long as it's a class, you have to start with an uppercase letter. Does that make sense? Class is the only thing mandatory that you start with an uppercase letter. Everything else can start with a lowercase, but then I like to do it like this all the way through because it's just easier to read. Well, you want to make sure that your variable names are descriptive. Can't tell you the number of times I've seen A, X, B, P. What is this variable? So I have to go and search for it. If they said loop or something about loop or iter of X, iteration of X, because iter is not a reserved word. Iteration and int is. So you can do it that way. But if you use a variable, it must be declared. So that's what we call a declaration sentence. You give the variable name, and prior to it, you'd say what kind of variable is it going to be? Is it going to be int, long, float, character, double? What are you going to do? So in this case, string, first name, string, last name, int, student ID, int, row or column. Why do I have row, comma, column? Because this is a valid declaration sentence. I could also put student ID, comma, row, column, comma, column. So long as you have the same type, you can declare them all as on one line. I find it easier to do that instead of doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over. After you do a declaration, it's always good to put a comment out to say what this variable name is going to be. So if you say string first name, well, what is the first name? Is it a student? Could it be a professor? Could it be whatever? You can say the student's first name. Now you've identified this as being the student's first name. So when I look at it, I can immediately go to the declaration sentence and find out what it is. Now we have what we call assignment statements. Notice I've declared salary right here as an integer. I have a string bonus message, and I have salary equal to $50,000, right? Well, this statement right here, commas are not allowed in numbers for one, but salary equal $50,000 is what we call an assignment statement because we're assigning the value of $50,000 to salary. Y'all with me? I haven't bored you to death yet.
I find that kind of bad style.
What about its bad style?
Well, it's not bad style. It's not personal style. If
Well-
I already have the number, it's declaration and assignment.
We're going to get to iteration or initialization statements. Now notice that right here, when we're talking about concatenating things, like when I said in the program, you got to concatenate kin and kin, right? This is how you do it. You'd have your string variable. So let's just say first name plus last name. And if I needed something to add, like I forget exactly what it says. Your string concatenation on this one would be in here we'd say hello, and then have a space, close it, plus first name, plus in quote space, close quote, last name, and then open it up again, comma, space, your last name, first name, last name are equal or not equal. Does that make sense?
No, it's just confusing.
Note just making sure that you understand that's how you concatenate different components to create one long print line. Okay? So we have, this is where we're going to get into tracing. And I told you when we declare a variable, but we haven't assigned anything to it, what do we do?
Question mark.
What's wrong with this code?
Well, you got an underscore between the 50,000.
Yeah. So actually this code isn't going to work. But what you do is we're going to declare integer salary. So we're just going to put a question mark here for line 1. All right?
Bonus is missing its second quotation. Bonus message, it should be bonus.
What? That's fine. Because you're doing a function here and giving the value of what this is. So this wouldn't work because you have that underscore there. This is just printing the variable of that. So that's fine.
Okay, because on the last slide they had the bonus in quotations and then it had,
Where? You have bonus right here. It's here.
okay,
Same thing.
so-
Because all this is a string.
Okay.
So I'm just printing out what's said in that quote. So we've got our question mark here. Bonus message on the second line would be a question mark. And you don't have anything for output because you haven't outputted anything. Now we're going to declare salary is 50,000. So on the third one we'd have 50,000 if that was correct. And that's all you do. So you're going to write a question mark in the column in that row of what you're doing. So you'd have row 1, integer salary. Row 2, string bonus message, right? Because we haven't put anything into it. Okay? here's a program template. I'm giving you this. I would use this for every single one. Just go ahead and copy it out of the slide and paste it into your assignments for your classes. So when you log in to go assignment 3, you create your new class, you name your class, you drop this baby in there, make sure you change this class name to whatever class name assignment 3, or your last name, first name, class, or chapter 3. When you create your new class, you just call it like you see it, right? Y'all all with me? Shake your heads that you understand what I'm saying. Initialization statements. This is what Colton was talking about. It's where you declare and assign in the same statement. So an example is I'm declaring total score being an integer, but I'm assigning a value of 0. Did y'all catch that? I'm declaring total score as an integer, but assigning a value of 0. Together, that's what we call initialization. Because I'm initializing my variable after I've declared it and giving it a value. Same thing with max score. Initialization requires the type, the variable, and the value. Okay? Instead of doing that, you can do it the long way. You can have your declarative statements, then your assignment statements. Which one's easier? Because you're not redoing the exact same thing over again. Either way, it's okay to use, but I prefer to see it with the initialization. I like to see shorter programs until your final exam. Variables that hold whole numbers, such as 1,000 or negative 22. Those are going to be integers or longs, like I told you. Right? And I'm sorry, instead, when I was thinking 65,536, I was thinking of binary. But it can go up, it has a range of about 4 billion. So it can go to 2 billion or less than 2 billion. Okay? That's just for the integer. You want to take a guess at what number this is for long?
It's a double.
Huh?
Double.
No, not for a whole number. You're going to use a long. Just remember, if you're going to do anything, unless you know it's less than 2 billion, use a long. If you know it's less, if you're just doing like for your loops, just do integers. Because integer, is going to be less than 2 billion. Because you're not going to do a loop that has 2 billion iterations, right? Well, unless you make a infinite loop. And like I told all my students, if you've ever made an infinite loop with a beeping sound, I will fail you in my class.
What if it's a screeching sound?
Any sound that you put in an infinite loop will cause you to fail my class.
What if it's saying pass me, or fail me?
No, I instead of fail you, I'm just going to get you good. I'm going to make you do an AW, so you have to pay for the course and retake it.
Oh, I can't do that.
With someone else teaching. Matthew, I'm already going to do that to you. So
So this is will drop off. I might as well drop out now
no, I've already done it. So you're too late for that.
because this is my second time taking Java.
Oh, you mean drop out of school? Okay, I got what you're saying. Okay, variables that have a decimal point anywhere in them, you're going to want to use a float or a double. Again, think of float as the same thing as an integer, just has decimal points. Does that make sense? Double is the same thing as a long, but with decimal points. So you want to use a double because a double can go up to 10 to the 308th power. And then you multiply that by 3.4. Okay? And then put the plus or minus of 0. So it's actually 6.8 because it goes to the negative side. Any questions on that?
Does it take up more space to use a double over a float, or what would be the advantage of using a float ever?
If you're talking, How many people are going to have a 10 to the 38th bank account?
I'd like to.
I'd like to have a double bank account. What are you talking about? I like it to where I couldn't put it as a float variable. That would be nice. But I don't think anyone in the world will ever have that much money. Not unless we all hit super hyperinflation.
Well, that's coming soon.
And that takes about 10 years of that before you even come close to this for trillionaires. Yes.
You ever watched,
Commanding Heights?
no, Blade Runner? How much did Harrison Ford pay for that one beer?
Probably a lot.
$46.
Assigning an integer value to a float, okay? You can assign an integer to a float or a double, but you cannot assign a double or a float to an integer or a long. Did you know that? Because it'll come up as a compiler because integer doesn't recognize the decimal point. You can put any integer into a decimal pointed value, but you can't put a decimal pointed value into an integer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So long as there's not a period, you can make it an integer. If there's a period, it's going to be a floating point type, and if it's text, it's going to be a string. Pretty simple. The default type for a floating point constant, hint, 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 is a double. How many times have y'all seen these quiz questions on here now?
I lost track after about 3.
Oh, I stopped. I didn't count.
Now you're paying attention more to my PowerPoints, aren't you? Just so that in case I don't go over them again. This example code generates complementation errors. Why? What's wrong with this?
Well, MPG.
Is it because of the semicolon?
Anytime you're using these, you want to use a double, unless you're going to identify it as a float. So it'd be 2.3f or 50.5f. To distinguish that as a floating point variable. All right? So if you just want it to be a constant, just use f's. Everything, and then make it double. You can define it as a float, but you need to specify your value being a float. So that's why it's easier just to define it as a double and not worry about it. So in this class, anytime you have a decimal point, define it as a double. Does that make sense? So you don't have to worry about this. Okay? Division operator is a slash. That's why you have to have 2 slashes for your comments. Can't tell you the number of times students have sent me stuff with 1 slash and tell them it's a comment. They said, well, it won't compile. I said, why are you trying to divide an invalid string? They're like, they don't get it. So put another slash in there, and then wonderfully it compiles.
It should turn a different color too.
Not one text pad.
Oh, TextPad does.
No, not from what I was talking about.
Oh.
But when you have the wonderful little error there, okay, make sure that you understand it's a division operator. And I still don't understand why he does that. I think he's just showing the spaces of where they're at, not necessarily trying to distinguish a comma. I wish you'd have just left it alone. Now this is right. And he's just showing you what the division operator can do. Okay, final. Well, you're using final. All it does is declare this is going to be the final variable. It's never going to change. So long as the speed of light will always be, anytime I reference speed of light, it will always be 299.792.458.0 in milliseconds. Always. That's what final means. All right. If somewhere you try later to change that variable, it'll give you a compile error. So it's always good to identify if you have a set static variable that is never going to change, and your program will never change it, to put final in it so that if anyone goes to try to change it, it'll error out on them. And then know that they're not supposed to change it. Okay? Name consonants. There are two different uses for it. Using name consonants lead to code that is more understandable. And if a program ever needs to change the consonant, it's easy to find and easy to change. And you always want to make your variables, declare them or initialize them or assign them at the top of that method. Why? So it's a good area for everyone to go to when you're trying to change something. Make sense? Your arithmetic operators are going to be your plus, your minus, and your star. We already talked about the division, which is also an arithmetic operator. But basically, you also have, but it performs division differently depending on whether it's numbers or operators. All right? And because you can have an integer divided by an integer, what's going to be your result? What should you type? If you divide anything, what
Sign it as a double.
you should assign as a double or no, I'm sorry, a double. That's right. Anyone know why Chris says you need to assign as a double?
It's very likely that I'll have a decimal in it.
Very likely. Okay, I'm going to divide 1 divided by 2. What do I have? A half. Well, if I made it as a float, or I mean as an integer, what do I have?
Compilation error.
A compilation error. Maybe. Or you might get a 0. And the reason being that if you're doing the divisor or divisor, when you're doing an initialization statement, it will compile error. If you're just taking an integer value, let's say Scott equals 1, and I divide 1 divided by 2, now I'm assigning it, that integer, Scott divided by 2, to a different integer variable, it will give you a half. But it'll say it's an error, you might get a 0, depending on if you're doing mod or not. But if you have a 9.0 divided by a 4.0, you're going to get a 2.25. Is that right? Yeah, 2.25. And that would be just fine, because it reads it as a divisor. Does that make sense? You just have to remember when you're doing division why it's separate. Even though it is a mathematical or arithmetic operator, the output of that can determine a compile error or continuation. Now, can I divide 2 integers and still have an integer? What if I do 2 divided by 2? I have 1. Still not a 0.0. But just think, anytime that you're going to, just to make your headaches go away, anytime that you're going to use a divisor or dividing something, make sure your value or your variable is set to a double. And it'll remove all doubt. Make sense? The next syntax line, because the 9 divided by the 4 equals, or evaluates to a 2.25. The next line asks you to determine what is 13 divided by 2. Well, if 13 is an integer, 2 is a double, what are you going to do? Again, you're going to do the double like Chris said, right? So 13 gets promoted to a double. Then a floating point division is done. It gives you 6.5. Pretty simple, right? What about a 9 divided by 2? What is 9 divided by 2?
4.5.
4.5. Maybe. If that's a float, right? Or a double. If it's an integer, compile error. What is the modulus operator? Does anyone know what modulus means besides Lee? Modulus simply means remainder. So 9 divided by 2, 2 can go into 9 4 times with a remainder of 1, right? So modulus is 1. How many of you have had computer security? And you did the IOC program this weekend, right?
Yeah. I did it before I left, but yeah.
How many of these babies did you have? 33 of them? Well, you have the comparison in the 2 sets of mods for each one, right?
A few.
What about 5 into 15? How many times can 15 go into 5? 0 with a remainder of 5, right? So 5 mod 15 would be 5. Pretty simple, right? So just think of modulus as being the remainder. The whole number remainder, not a decimal point. Everyone with me? How many of y'all are asleep? Given these initialization values of x equals 10, y equals 4, double or z is going to be 6. Let's do these. For the order of precedence, what would we do? What's the first thing that gets done?
Well, you're going to divide x.
You're going to divide x and y. So 10 divided by 4. What do we get?
2.5.
2.5 plus 10, or 2.5 plus 6. So we have 8.5, right? 8.5. Now what's our next one?
10 times 2 is 20.
What is this? Are you going to do divided by 20, or are you going to do 8.5 divided by 10?
Divided by 10.
Okay. What about this one? What about if we throw in a modulus? Well, if you get dividing anything into 0, you're going to get 0. And divided here, you got 0 and 0, so what's going to be your answer? 6.0. Right? X can go into 10 with the remainder of what? That's a division by 0. It's a div by 0. Okay? Let's talk about increment and decrement. If you see, anytime you see an x plus plus in your for loops, all it's saying is x is equal to x plus 1. That's all it's saying. Or if x minus minus, it's x is equal to x minus 1. And what happens if you put x plus plus comma x equals 0 on, or I'm sorry, plus plus x minus, or what's the difference between plus plus x and x plus plus? Anyone know?
Plus and minus variable with x. Variable x could be
Okay.
any number where x plus plus was always plus 1.
Now, if I have a x plus 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 x, or minus minus x, x minus minus. If I'm in a loop, depending on the value of x, do I add before the loop starts, or do I add after the loop is executed? So if I had a for loop, x equals 0, x is less than 10, plus x, when I start this loop, x already has a value of 1. Even though I defined it as 0. X starts with 1, then I go print, system out print, whatever, and then I come back here. How many times is this going to initiate? 9 times. Versus, that's still to 0. as it goes through the loop. Does that make sense? If the pluses or minuses are on the left side, then always just do yourself a favor. For the first time that you do a loop, write a comment line on that first line saying what you want x value to be for the first, say, x equals 0 for the first time through. So that if you only get 9 times, you can go back and say, oh, what did I do wrong? Oh, well, I screwed that up. Increment increases your value of that variable by 1. Decrement decreases it. Yes, Cole?
This is a question about your for loop. Since technically, wouldn't you have to you'd be declaring a new value x, wouldn't it be integer x or whatever you have the value be?
Well,
Or
if you're
x?
smart, you've already done up here. You could, instead of doing it here, you could just say, you could say int x equals 0. You do it there too if you want. You can always declare and initialize or assign a statement right here.
Yeah.
I just didn't do it. I was just trying to draw up for the
Well,
reason.
I was just asking to make sure.
Yeah, you can do it here. You have to declare the variable.
Yeah.
It just depends on where you declare it at. Is everyone with me? Compounding. What if I do x plus equals 3? Hint, hint, hint.
It adds 3.
What about x plus equals, or age plus equals 5?
Increases it by 5.
Hint, hint, hint. Hint, hint, hint. Y'all caught that, right? So let's figure this out. A is 4, B is 6, C is 2. A minus equals B. So A,
A is assigned the value of -2.
no. A already had 4 taken off, so I have -2. Right? Now I have 3.0 here. So what is going to be B minus minus? 5. So if I'm taking A minus that, so I have a -2, a 5, and a 3. So 3.0 times equals B, be 15.0. So what do I have here? I'm going to have A, we declared as a -2, B, 5, C, 15.0.
It's a fun little bit of code.
Okay? Typecasting. Sometimes you'll need to convert a value to a different type, i.e., your ASCII character that it asks you for. You need to tell me what character value it is. I want to give a type like characters expression. Suppose we have an interest that stores in bank accounts as a double. You want to extract the dollars portion of the interest and store it in an integer variable. Okay? So I'm going to say interest in dollars. To do that, the int cast operator like this. Why int? Because I'm only taking the left of that period, right? Because interest is a double. So it'd be 2.3. So I take the interest of 2. Instead of 2.3, I get 2. This value would be stored as 2. Does that make sense? So if I did A, or first name, or go through a loop, and for each array instance, we say, well, we're not going to get into arrays yet. So character at 0, that would be the 0 space. For Ken, give me the ASCII value, and it will give you the character value. Does that make sense? Now, if I'm trying to do a multiplication, the balance times the interest rate to get a figure, and then typecast it into an int to store it in interest dollars, I have to do this calculation first, so you have to store it in parentheses. Does that make sense? The character type Okay, B 6 colon. So if I have a character with first, middle, and last, MLK. Interesting. Print line, first, middle, last. Hello, MLK. What does it print? Hello, MLK. Right? If I wanted to do escape sequences to create, a different a comment, a single quote, a double quote, if I want trying to print a character value, go into a new line, a tab, a double quote, single quote, I do it like that. This helps if I'm trying to do a tabbed column, because I can come after ID, I can do /T or +/T or \T, and it'll tab it over to the next tab to print my next part of it. Does that make sense? So that's how you can formulate a nice little table. Primitive versus reference. Primitive are these type. Those are always set. They will never change. Reference variables are going to be your strings and your calendars. Those are programmer-defined classes versus a set. And those will always be, reference variables will always start with an uppercase letter. So that'll be helpful to distinguish the difference between. String S1, string S2. If I store goodbye into string S1, then I come in and say string 1 is going to be you say plus string S1, so I'm going to store the value of that, so it'll be you say plus goodbye. So you say goodbye, and all I'm doing is adding with concatenations into this. So I'm going to add plus equal, add this with string 2, which is right here, and then I put a period. And then all I'm doing is printing out string 1. So what would it say?
You say goodbye and I say hello.
Exactly. That's all it says. Why don't they just print it in one statement? Just kidding. Alright. If I'm looking for the last character, I can do animal, which would be this animal. So when you store in first name, this is exactly what you need to look at, okay? Read what the last character number is, okay? You start with 0, 1, 2. 0 will always be the first point in anything that you read in. So last character equals plus animal dot my character at C. So in this case, for your program assignment, it will always be first name dot character at 0 for the first initial. Does that make sense? Yes.
Say you had a turtle or something, then it'd have to be character at 5 or 4.
It would be at 5
Okay.
because you had 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
But if you're doing the last statement, you're not always going to know what
Right, and that's when you get into arrays and you can calculate it out.
Oh, okay.
This is just basic stuff right here, just trying to teach you the logic on it.
Okay.
People always ask me that same question. How would you know? Okay, now we can also do this. This is the easy where we start getting into calculating the length of something. String S, hi. S, length. Length is a method to tell me how long that is. So that once I get S length, so if I'm going to do a for length, I can say for X length is 0, essentially while S length is less than or equal to S length, or X is equal to S length. Less than or equal to X length, I'm sorry. I'd have to be writing it out. X plus plus. So you're saying you start at the 0 character, and you're going through it one at a time reading in those characters. Does that make sense? Like, I'll work on that on Wednesday with you, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. String methods. Equals ignore case, or the equals method. If you want to, when we read in animal 1, like first name, animal 2 is fly, right? And then we read in the second one, right? So this is the program that you're going to really be interested in doing. I'm going to create a new creature. And I'm going to assign it to equal or instead of doing this, I can say first name equals, and then print out instead of in here, equals in the parentheses last name. Did y'all catch that? What you're going to want to do is you'll have your string, first name, right, equals and yeah, I got that. Why? Because I'm taking the value of this and comparing it to this. So if that isn't, then you'd say not. How easy is that now? I just solved your programming problem for you right there. Okay, input the scanner class. Like I said, you have three different parts. You have your import. You got to import Java util scanner. Do this for every program you do from here on out so you can read any input. And in your main method, you have to put in scanner. Standard input equals new scanner, because you're calling the scanner here. You're identifying the standard input into standard input. Okay? So that when you're coming in to read the variable, whatever variable you want it to be, standard input dot next line. So it'll read anything on that line until whenever the enter key was hit. Make sense?
So would that be the default use that you would use for a string?
This right here is where you're going to input first name.
Right.
First name equals this.
Okay, so
Then you would print out what's your last name.
so that's the next
Do last name. What's your age? You'll catch that. But you have to have this up in the class. You have to have this one in the method and this one down in your function of where you're trying to input it. Pretty simple. Everything for this program is directly off these slides. Matter of fact, better not go too far before they catch the recording and call it plagiarism, or not plagiarism, but copyright infringement. Anyway, the scanner class tells you how to do it. Next basically goes to the next space, next integer. It'll go look for the next integer, next long, next float, next double. Same thing as like next line. All right? Those are the different ways that you can look in your until a specific item is found. What is white space? That's any information that's in there that is not up to that next. It'll read up until that next point where you tell it to. Let's see here. That's basically the same thing. So I'd look at slide 48 for your program. That kind of gives you an idea of what you need to do. 49 will do the same thing. Okay, let's get your quizzes. What famous speech in chapter 3's first program is based on? I have a dream. What's the main method heading? Public, static, void, main, strings, args. Okay? We talked about this one too, right? System out print line. Open parentheses. Hello world, just as it is in the quotes, and then close it out. Semicolon. Any questions, items, concerns, gripes, moans, complaints?